Hey there, Pro Church Media community, this is Jason again. In this tutorial, we're going to dive into After Effects, play around with some repeaters, some glitch effects, all kinds of fun stuff to create this really cool and really simple text repeater project all inside of After Effects. No third-party plugins required, all good old-fashioned homegrown After Effects goodness, if there is such a thing. I happen to believe there is such a thing, so without further ado, let's dive right into it. Okay, so we're here in After Effects, and let's go ahead and start with a new composition, Command N on the keyboard. I'm going to make mine 1080 by 1080, 24 frames a second, 10 seconds long. You can, of course, make this whatever you want for your purposes. I'm just going to call this Jesus, hit OK. Okay, so now we want to start by creating a background layer, and so I'm just going to grab my shape tool with Q on the keyboard. You can just click this icon, and I'm just going to draw a rectangle here. You can make this whatever color you want. I'm just going to go with something like a really dark gray, something kind of right around there. I don't want it to be completely black. I don't want it to be too light, just something like that so it can interact with some of the effects we're going to be using, and I think that looks pretty good. All right, next let's go ahead and add a piece of text, and the font I'm going to be using for this is called Titling Gothic FB. This is a font you can get from Adobe Fonts, and so if you have a Creative Cloud subscription, you have access to this. Just click here on the character panel, click on the drop down for the font, go to Add Adobe Fonts right here. It'll take you over to Adobe Fonts, and you can just go ahead and search for it. Just type in Titling Gothic, and it should pull up that one right there. And just click on that, and then once it pulls it up, just make sure you activate the ones that you want. This is a really great font with tons of different options, so you can just go up here and choose to activate all the fonts, and it will get all of them. That'll be available immediately, and you can start using them. So check this one out. It's a really cool font. Okay, so back in After Effects, let's hit Command T to pull up the text tool, and I'm gonna just type in Jesus here. And then just scale it down to kind of fit in here. And I think that'll look pretty good. And while the text is selected, I'm gonna go up to the pan behind tool and just hold Command and then double click on that just to center up that anchor point. And now come over to the align panel and then just align it horizontally and vertically, and I think that'll be pretty good. Okay, so now we need to use a repeater on this, but unfortunately you can't use repeaters on live text objects, and so we have to turn this into a shape layer. To do that, just come to your text here and right click and choose create shapes from text. Fortunately, it will duplicate this, so you always have your original down there. And I'm just going to rename this Jesus, and I think that'll work. And now if you dig down into this and twirl down into the content, you can see each of these is its individual is an individual shape layer, and you can actually modify these points if you want to. I don't want to, but this will be great. Okay, so let's go ahead and select all of these and then just hit Command G to group them. I'm going to call this one Center. I'm going to be using 3 different instances of this, and you'll see why here in a little bit, but we'll just start with this for right now. And then duplicate it with Command D, and I'm going to call this one Bottom. Okay, let's temporarily disable the center one. And now we need to come over to this Add button. Just click on that, scroll down to Repeater, and you can see it's starting to repeat this. And so we need to modify how it's repeating it. So if we come down to this repeater and then twirl that down, we have the number of copies we want to use. Let's do something like 11. I think will work pretty well. And then in the transform is where you can actually modify how it repeats it. And so right now it's I'm putting each individual instance over 100 pixels. And so I'm just going to zero that out. And instead I want to go vertically. And so I'm just going to start dragging this up, and you can see, how it's starting to work, and that'll be pretty cool. So I think something like that will work pretty well. And we'll worry about the top part of a little bit later. The great thing about the repeater is you can actually stack this effect. And so for example, there's the rotation you can do, which is kind of cool, but maybe I wanted to have this kind of effect right here. I could then duplicate this, and I might go down and just zero that out. And then I might start rotating it, and you can see it's creating this really interesting rotation based upon the previous repeater. I could also maybe move the anchor point out. I could move the Y some more, move the position over, and maybe start scaling it down. And so you can do some really interesting things. Now it's affecting that entire block, and so you can keep just stacking these on top of each other and creating really interesting effects. We're not going to be doing this for this project, but I just wanted to kind of point that out just because there's tons of creative potential there. All right, let's go ahead and delete that. And I think I'm pretty happy with this, but I also want this to kind of scale down. And so in this repeater, I'm going to go to the scale property, and let's just move forward. I think this is about where I'm going to have my animation start about 1 second and have it end maybe right around here or so. And so I'm going to add a keyframe for the position, and then I'm going to add a keyframe for the scale. And I think for the scale, let's just move it down to like 73% or so, 75, I don't know, stuff like that. And I like that, but I want less space between these instances, so I'm just going to modify this, maybe pull it in, something like that, and you can see we're getting this really cool effect going on. I think maybe something like 140 will work. And as we animate, this is where it'll really kind of shine. Now let's move back to 1 second. Let's put this down to 0, and then put the scale up to 100. And we'll ease this a bit later to give it some more style, but as you just play it back, you can see we're getting that really kind of cool effect going on. And so I hope you can see there's tons of creative potential with the repeaters, and so they're really fun to play around with. Okay, so I think I'm pretty happy with that, although I think, maybe for the start opacity, let's put it down to maybe 45, maybe even 40. And then the end opacity down to 0, just so it kind of fades out. We'll tweak this a little bit later to make it more punchy, but I think I like that. Okay, so now we have our bottom one done. Let's go ahead and duplicate that with Command D. I'm going to rename this one top, and then I just need to hit U on the keyboard to bring up those keyframes. And for this one, I'm just going to type in the position field and then just put a minus in front of that 140. It should go the opposite direction. And so as we play this back, you can see we're getting this really cool kind of effect going on. So I think I really like that. Okay, let's twirl that back up and then twirl it down so we can reveal all the contents again. I'm going to put this center one up above, activate it again. And for this one, I don't think I want to have a fill on it, so I'm just going to zero out that fill. But I do want to add a stroke. Click on this center right here, and then come to the Add button and go down to Stroke. And now it's just going to add a stroke below all of these, and so this stroke will affect all of these letters right here. And so I think I'm going to make it just pure white and put it up to 6. And I think that looks pretty good. And so if we turn that off, you can see, oh, we somehow got that stroke back. I don't know why this does it. Sometimes it decides, oh, you want that stroke on all of those. And so sometimes you just have to select those all again and then just delete that stroke again. So now we should have no stroke if we turn this back on. We have just one stroke we can deal with. Okay, so I'm going to twirl this down and go to Stroke Width. And I'm going to, maybe have that stroke width be full right about there. And let's maybe come back to about right here, put it down to 0. And so now what's going to happen is as these pieces kind of pull apart, that stroke is going to reveal some more. And I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so one last thing we want to do is, give it a little bit of energy as all this is happening. So maybe make it feel like it's getting some acceleration from those, lines going up and down. So what I'm going to do is come down to the transform for the entire contents, or for the entire layer here. And let's just come down to the scale. And there's a couple different ways you can do this. You could either modify the scale for the entire layer, or you could just group all of these together, and then it's going to create a transform for that entire group. I think I'm going to do that instead. So I'm just going to come down here, hit scale right there at 1 second, move forward to right here, and then just scale everything up a little bit, maybe like 123 or so. So now as this happens, it's kind of pushing forward, and maybe you'll get a little bit of energy from that. Okay, so that's cool. Let's now reveal all the keyframes with U, and then just select all of these just by kind of marqueing over them. And so, well, let's go ahead and right click and choose Keyframe Assistant Easy Ease. And now I just want to select these first ones right here. I'm going to go into the graph editor, and I'm just going to pull this in just a little bit, something like that, just to give it, some nice easing at the beginning. And then I'm going to select all these ones at the end, and then just kind of pull them out even more, just so it kind of has a nice easing into that final state. So let's see what that looks like. So now it kind of punches in, as you can see, and I think that looks pretty cool. Okay, so, and you can tweak this, of course, forever until you get something that you like, but I think I like that, so I think we'll go with it. And of course, the great thing about the way that we've set this up is if we think it's, maybe too big right here, I could just select this master scale right here and just drag it down. And so now it's going to start, smaller, and then everything scales up like that. I think I liked it better the other way. Let's see. I might even go initially smaller and leave it where it kind of ends. So let's try something like that. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so as you can see, it makes it very easy to iterate this animation. Okay, so now we have that done. Let's go ahead and start stylizing this. So in this original, you can see we have this nice gradient going on here, and it goes from white to this gradient. So let's kind of deal with that for right now. Okay, so we're going to click on this layer right here, right click, go to layer styles, and then choose gradient overlay. And I think I want this gradient to happen, about where the stroke width happens as well. I don't want it to take the entire animation. So I'm going to come down to the gradient overlay, twirl that down, go to edit gradient. Well, first of all, hit the keyframe there, go to edit gradient. And I want to set 3 frames or 3 positions here. And I'm just going to change these all to pure white. And so that's going to be, it's not really a gradient, but it can kind of trick it into thinking that we have this, gradient at the beginning. And now let's move to about, right there or so, and we can go back to edit gradient. And I think I'll make this, kind of that punchy orange, something like that. Don't worry about where this is right now. We'll deal with that later. Maybe make this, kind of a vibrant blue of some sort. And I'm just going to click on that, get the sample, click on that same color. I think that looks pretty good. And now we can deal with the way it kind of behaves. I want it to be an angle of 90 degrees. And I think I don't want to align it with the layer, so I'm going to take that off. And now it's just a matter of styling it. So I can just, I could maybe pull the scale down so it, gets more of the yellow there in the center. I think I kind of like that. And as we add some more effects and stuff, it'll become more punchy. So I think that's looking pretty good. And then, maybe we'll add just some easing to this. We don't probably need to do too much to it. Yeah, I like that transition. If you had it wait the entire time, it's gonna, probably not feel as nice just because there's that kind of muddiness right there. So I think I like it, kind of happening right where that transition happens. All right, looking good. Let's hit U to close that out. Okay, so now we can really start to make this feel nicer. So in this original, we have lots of things going on here. We have this kind of almost a volumetric light going on here. We have some chromatic aberration. We have some noise. We have some of these lines, some grit going on, all kinds of stuff. So let's just kind of take this systematically. So the first thing we're going to do is just add some vibrance to this to kind of punch up those colors. And so hit Command-Alt-Y on your keyboard to pull up an adjustment layer. Let's just call this vibrance. And then we can go up to Effect and then go to Color Correction and then choose Vibrance. And I think for the vibrance, I'm just going to punch it up to like 69 or so. And maybe for the saturation up to like 55 or so. And so right now it's a pretty subtle effect, but you can see we're getting some deeper colors there. And I think I kind of like that, so I think we'll go with that. Okay, so next we're going to do some, make these edges a bit crispier. And so let's do Command-Alt-Y again, and let's call this Edges. And we're going to go up to Effect, and then Stylize, and then choose Find Edges. And I think we're going to invert this, and then blend with the original. Let's put this, maybe to something like 15% or so. And now we can change the blending mode to, I don't know, let's try Add. Add usually works pretty well for this. That's looking pretty good. And I think we need to pull down the opacity, so just hit T to pull up the opacity, and then let's bring it down to about 60 or so. I think that looks pretty good. You can see it's just, helping to, pull out some of those edges a bit and gives it kind of a nice retro kind of feel to it. All right, next let's work on this kind of volumetric light that's going on here. We're going to do that with the radial blur. So once again, Command-Alt-Y to pull up an adjustment layer. Let's call it radial blur. And then go up to Effect, and then choose Blur and Sharpen, and then go down to CC Radial Fast Blur. And then what you want to do for this is for the zoom, go to brightest, and then let's just punch this up to like, oh, I don't know, something like, maybe 94, something like that. Usually 100 is too much, but we just want to get that nice volumetric light going on there. And then of course we probably need to change the blending mode. Let's change this to maybe like soft light. That looks pretty good. We're getting some of that glow going off there, and as we come back to this, that's looking pretty nice. I like that. We might even, maybe pull down the opacity a bit, because I don't want it to be overwhelming, and I don't want to make the background completely black. So let's put it, somewhere between 40 and 50 will work pretty well. Okay, I think I'm liking that. Next, let's make it even more crispy by adding a sharpen. So once again, Command-Alt-Y to pull up an adjustment layer. Let's call this Sharpen. Go up to Effect, Blur and Sharpen, and then just choose Sharpen. Let's bump this up to about 100, and you can see we're getting those nice, really crispy edges. We're even getting some of those kind of showing through that opacity there, which looks kind of cool. But let's maybe change the blending mode to like darken. You can see we're still getting that same effect, but it's not as intense. If you turn it on and off, you can kind of see, it's pretty subtle, but it's helping to really sharpen up those edges really nicely. And I think we can probably leave the opacity at 100%. Okay, so now we need to deal with these lines and the dust and scratches that we have there. So once again, well, actually, let's use a solid for this. So let's do Command-Y to pull up a new solid, and I'm gonna call this one Dust, and just make sure it's the comp size, and hit OK. And now we're going to go up to Effect and then choose Noise and Grain and Fractal Noise. Fractal Noise, if you've never used it before, will be one of your dearest friends, your closest companions inside of After Effects, because it's so versatile for so many things. And so we're going to make a really quick and dirty bit of dust and grunge here. So if you can probably leave the fractal type at basic and leave most of these settings the same. Basically what we're trying to do is, get as much contrast between the whites and the darks as we can. So let's bump up the contrast quite a lot, pull down the brightness a lot too, and you can see we're starting to get, some of that dust and scratch and grit and grime kind of going on, which looks pretty good. You can come to the transform and scale it up if you want to. It really just depends the type of look you're going for. And sometimes what I like to do is, maybe scale it down and then, pull the brightness down even more just to kind of make it sparser, pull the contrast up, kind of whatever you want to do. Maybe sometimes you can pull the contrast up and then bring the brightness down. It's really just a matter of experimenting until you get what you want. Okay, that looks pretty good. And so now what we want to do is set this to basically animate. So you could animate the evolution if you want to, but it's not going to look as nice. So what you want to do is come down to this evolution options, just twirl that down. And for the random seed here, just hit alternate click on that. It's going to pull up an expression field. And we're going to do just a really quick expression here. And let's just do something like time, and then use the times symbol, and then do something like 8. And so now it's basically going to choose a new random seed, at that rate. And so as you play it back, you can see we're getting that nice kind of stuttery, grit kind of dust feel of like old cameras or whatever. So I think that looks pretty good. Now we need to get rid of the black here. So with that selected, go over to your effects and presets, and then here in the search field, just type in unmult, U-N-M-U-L-T, and you'll see this right here. If you hit enter, it'll apply it right to it, and now it's going to get rid of all the black, just leaving you with the white. And so now you get that nice kind of gritty look there, and we're starting to get pretty processor intensive here. So if you need to, you can turn down your resolution temporarily just to kind of, see what the animation looks like, and that's looking pretty cool. All right, so now we need to add in those lines, and so we can do the same thing with another instance of fractal noise. So do a new solid, Command-Y. I'm just going to call this lines, make sure it's the comp size, hit OK. Once again, effect fractal noise. And for this one, what I want to do, I can still probably use basic and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to come to the transform and unlink the uniform scaling. So now what I want to do is just scale the height up as much as it can go. And then I really want to bump up the contrast, really lower the brightness. So I'm just trying to get as many of these lines as I can. And then I'm just going to pull the width, kind of like that. And I really want to just get a ton of contrast going on here. I might turn up the complexity here. Where's the complexity? Or I might even turn it down. You just kind of got to play around with it. You can see as you turn the complexity up, you get more of the gritty lines. You can even play around with other types of fractal types just to see what happens. If you invert it, you might get something different, and you just kind of play around with, these settings until you get something that you like. And so I think that actually looks kind of cool. And so I could try something like that. I might do the scale width, maybe in like that, maybe boost the contrast, and I think that looks pretty good. Okay, so I think for this instance, what I might do, well, let me go back to my original here. And so it looks like I might just go ahead and copy and paste this. You can see the settings here. I use turbulent sharp, so that's probably what I want to use there. So it's just a specific fractal type that I think works a little bit better just because of how the lines work out. And I think that looks probably a little bit better. I might turn the complexity down, maybe boost the contrast a little bit, and you can see there's just tons of experimentation you can do. Now for this one, I don't think I'm going to use the random seed. Instead, I really kind of want this to actually, feel like these lines are moving about. For this one, maybe just animate the evolution. So let's come to the evolution, just add a keyframe there, go all the way to the end, and then just kind of, do that. And let's see what that looks like. That might be a little bit too slow, so I'm really just going to kind of pump this up, and we could try something like that. And I might drop the brightness down a little bit, something like that. I might just go ahead and grab this one, just copy and paste it, just to save a little bit of time. So I'm just going to paste that in there, and we'll see what that looks like. I think I like that one better, and you can just play around with the settings until you get what you like. Okay, so now we got our lines in there, we got our dust in there. Again, we need to do the unmolt thing, so just come over to Effects and Presets, type in unmolt, hit enter to apply it to that layer, and now we have our dust, we have our kind of scratches, our grit, our grime, everything's looking good. Okay, so I think we're getting pretty close. There's a few other things we can do to make this, feel even nicer. So you can see what I had going on here is, there's a little bit of, movement with the text here. And so if I twirl down into here, you can see there's, if I go into there's this wiggle transform right here. And so what this is doing is actually kind of transforming all the characters and all the shapes within these groups. And so what I'm going to do is come down to my text layer here, or my shape layer, go to the contents, and then with the contents selected, I'm going to go to add and then choose wiggle transform. Okay, so now what I can do is come down to this transform within the wiggle transform. It can get a little confusing because there's lots of different transform controls, but I'm going to twirl that down, and now let's see what I did here. So in this original one, I did it pretty slight, like -5, 7, and 1 for the rotation. So I might do something like that. So maybe like -5. Let's go ahead and solo this for right now. Maybe 7, and let's do like 1 for the rotation. So you can see it's kind of starting to wiggle those individual characters, and so it's kind of interesting. I don't want it to wiggle that smoothly though, so I'm going to drop this down to 0. And we're going to do that same random seed trick that we did before. So within the wiggle transform, go to random seed, alt click on that to pull up the expression field. And once again, let's do time times, let's try 2, see what that looks like. That's too slow. Let's try something like 12. That might be too fast. It's kind of hard to tell. So maybe we'll do something like 8. It's just kind of a matter of experimenting with the look that you're going for. I think 12 is okay. We're going to be posterizing the time, so I think this will work pretty well. Yeah, it's got a kind of glitchy effect. Okay, so now let's go ahead and unsolo that. And now what we want to do is add some chromatic aberration to this. So I'm going to do Command-Alt-Y to pull up an adjustment layer. I'm going to call this Chromatics. And then this is an effect that's available, I believe it's at least in Adobe After Effects CC 2019. It might be in 2018 as well. If you go up to Effect and then scroll down to Immersive Video, there's this VR chromatic aberrations. Go ahead and apply that, and you can see we're starting to get that chromatic aberration. Looks super awesome, and we're getting some really fun effects going on there. And so I think I like that quite a bit. I might, change the fall off distance up a little bit higher, or maybe even down lower, I don't know. You can kind of play around with it until you get what you like. I think I kind of like that. And then what I think I might do is just mess with the, add a kind of an expression to this horizontal field of view. Alt click on that. And I'm just going to have it wiggle, so I'm going to type in wiggle. And then I might have it change, let's say every, 8 times a second. And let's have it move like 15 percentage points. And so now that is going to kind of, move around. It's going to probably look different every time, which is what I want. So I think that'll work. I might just copy and paste that. Do the same thing for the aberration for the red. Just paste that in there. And so now we're going to get wiggling on the chromatic aberration as well. And I think that's looking pretty good. And I think that looks, yeah, I think I like that. So we'll go with that. Okay, so we're getting there. We're getting some really interesting effects going on here. So now we're going to add some noise to this. Command-Alt-Y, call this noise, and go up to Effect, scroll down to Noise and Grain, and choose Noise. And I'm just going to bump this up to like 15% just to get some really gritty noise on there. You can use color noise if you want to. I think I'm going to take it off, something like that. That looks pretty cool. Okay, so we're almost done here. I'm also going to add kind of a fake camera in there. So Command-Alt-Shift-Y to pull up a new null. I'm just going to call this camera. And now I'm going to parent the text to that, and probably just the text. And so I'm going to just parent this to the camera. And if you had any other shapes or anything else like that, you could parent those to them too. I might also do the lines and the specks, or the dust. So parent that to the camera. And so this is basically going to be, kind of moving this around just a little bit. So I think for this one, let's see what I did here. Wiggle 4, 5. So I think I'm just going to copy and paste that. What you could do is just go to Position, Alt click on there, and then just type in wiggle, put a parentheses, 4 times a second, move by 5 pixels. It's going to automatically close it off for you if you're in CC 2019. And so now that's going to, wiggle the entire group and the lines and the specks around. And so, we're starting to get kind of an interesting look going on there. Okay, so we're getting there. One more thing, or two more things. Let's now add a posterized time to this. So this is going to kind of give it more of that stuttery, old kind of vintage feel to it. So Command-Alt-Y to pull up a new adjustment layer. Let's call this posterize time. And go up to Effect, scroll down to Time, and then choose Posterize Time. And now you can basically type in your frame rate. I'm going to choose 12 for this. And so basically what that's going to do is, it's going to get rid of every other frame. And so it's going to feel a lot more stuttery, kind of almost have a, stop motion-y feel, all that kind of stuff. And so let's see what this looks like. And you can see we're starting to get pretty processor intensive. I think I really like that look though, so I think that's pretty fun. And I like that, and so I think we're going to go with that for right now. And I think for maybe some of these lines and dust and specks, you can see we're really getting, a lot more of that there than I want. So I might just kind of take the opacity down just a bit, maybe like 50%, just so it's not as noticeable. And of course, I can always come in here and, modify the contrast and stuff to kind of affect it, and that might actually look a little bit better. And then we're not getting those weird kind of chromatic bands that we had before, although they were kind of interesting too. So, and like that at the bottom is kind of interesting. So anyway, there we go. Okay, so just about there. I think the last thing that I want to maybe do is just add a quick curves adjustment. So Command-Alt-Y to pull up an adjustment layer. You're hopefully used to this by now. Just call this curves. Let's go up to Effect, choose color correction, and then go to curves. And I think I'm just going to add some points here. I'm just going to punch up the brights a little bit just so that really brings out some of those highlights. I might pull up the mids just a little bit to kind of give it that kind of almost washed out feel. Maybe pull up the darks a bit just so it has that very vintage look to it. And you can play around with it until you get what you like. Something like that looks pretty good. I might pull this in here, maybe pull the highlights down a bit. Just kind of play around with it until you get the look that you want, but I think that's looking pretty cool. Alright, so I think that's about it. Let me go ahead and render this real quick and I'll come back and show you the finished product. Alright, so there we go. I think we have a really cool look here, and there's all kinds of interesting things going on here. And there's some pulsating things happening. There's, this cool effect at the beginning where the text separates into our, cool repeater text there. And so I hope you can see there's tons of interesting things you can do with repeaters inside of After Effects. And with some built-in effects inside of After Effects, you can also create some really interesting looks, whether glitchy or not. Just kind of depends on what you're going for. But just tons of stuff you can play around with. So get into After Effects, play around with some of the repeaters, have a lot of fun with it, and I will talk to you later.